All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tyler Scribner. I'm a policy analyst for the National Congress of American Indians. I'll be your moderator for this webinar series, along with James Colomb, project manager for the Center for Indian Country Development. On behalf of NCAI and CICD, we would like to thank you for attending the second installment of our four-part series on homeownership in Indian country. This four-part webinar series covers the Tribal Leaders Handbook on Homeownership, a publication of the Center for Indian Country Development of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis and Enterprise Community Partners. Today we'll hear from Krystal Langholz, Chief Operating Officer for the First Nations Oweesta, followed by Sharon Vogel, Director of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe Housing Authority. James Colomb will then speak on transferable lessons and opening up the webinar for a Q&A session. Lastly, we'll provide you with a few brief announcements of upcoming webinar dates and closing remarks, including resource materials. Before we begin the presentation, I'd like to go over some of our webinar features. First, you should see on your screen the PowerPoint for today's presentation. If during the presentation you experience any lag in slide transition, it may be a result of internet connections, so just give it a few seconds to update on your screen and things should be going all right. If not, please reach out to us either through the chat box or the question box, which I will cover in just one moment. Currently, with the exception of the panelists and moderators, all audience phone lines are muted until the conclusion of the presentation. But if you'd like to queue up a question at any time during the presentation, you can type it into the questions box on your webinar control panel. After the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session, and panelists will answer questions submitted through the questions box. If you'd like to ask your question over the phone, please use the raise hand option so we can unmute your phone line after the presentation and during the Q&A session. Our webinar software archives all questions submitted through the questions box, so if we're unable to answer or address your questions, we'll follow up with you after the webinar has concluded. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded so that we can share this presentation with you and others not able to attend today. Now that we've covered some of those webinar features, I'd like to turn it over to James for any brief opening remarks. James?
Thanks. Welcome, everyone. We're really excited about this. The Handbook on Homeownership has been one of the main focuses of the Center for Indian Country Development for the last few years, done, of course, in careful collaboration with our partners. And last week we had a sort of a broad overview of why we're doing all this work. But today, and in the next two sessions, we're going to get into how you actually implement this stuff. We've got a practitioner from a tribal housing authority and Krystal Langholz, another expert, and hopefully we can get into how you can actually figure out what is the best approach for your community. We know there's lots of diversity across tribes, and with that, I think we can go to Krystal.
Hi there, thank you so much. As I was introduced, I'm Krystal Langholz. I'm Chief Operating Officer for First Nations Oweesta Corporation. And I'm sure that many of you might know our organization, but we are a national native CDFI intermediary, community development financial institution. And we support CDFIs that work in our tribal communities, tribal housing authorities, many different kinds of partners all throughout the country that are working on behalf of the tribal communities pursuing economic development, as well as home ownership. So it's just an honor to get to address you all today. Could you advance the next slide, please? So I've been asked to talk a little bit about both homebuyer readiness and about assessing community needs. And it's really critical for those of you who are trying to build and develop strong home ownership programs. Many of you all are in communities where homebuyer readiness, you might come from a community where there's low home ownership rates. That might not be a common thing in the community to have home ownership be an opportunity. And so you're trying to support the community in developing and creating opportunities that they might not normally have and might not be very familiar with. And so it's pretty critical. When we did a survey as part of the Homeownership Coalition a while back, asking what was perceived as some of the biggest barriers for homeownership in the communities that they served. And the response, overwhelmingly, the one of them that came back was homebuyer readiness and the financial capabilities of the individuals in the community. And so I want to just provide, in front of you, you'll see two different charts that were taken from, in 2016, there was a published survey about financial capabilities that came out from our partner First Nations Development Institute, kind of looking statistically across the board at financial capabilities among all different population groups, and specifically focusing on Native American communities. And the overwhelming finding, unfortunately, was that the financial capabilities in Native American communities was lower than any other kind of population groups. And of course, that's for a lot of historical reasons that I don't probably need to go into too far in depth, but that was sort of the context that a lot of our homeownership programs are working in. So, among the charts here, you see the question, have you set aside emergency or rainy day funds that could cover expenses for 3 months in case of sickness, job loss, economic downturn, or other emergencies? And among all population groups, only 30% of American Indian and Alaska Native could answer that question with a yes, which was lower, of course, than the other population groups. Same with, do you have a checking account and savings account? So, that's the context for many tribal communities. And so having strong home buyer readiness programs is pretty critical. Could you have the next slide, please? But I will say that Native American communities have totally taken on this challenge with open arms and really crafty, amazing programming. We did a survey, it was getting a while ago now, but in 2014, and asked the question, what was the biggest supporter of financial education programs in tribal communities? And the answer, of course, was the tribes themselves. Tribes were investing in themselves to build financial education programs, homebuyer readiness programs, and were investing in their tribal citizens. So we find that very encouraging. And there's a lot of different kinds of homebuyer readiness programming that maybe your housing authority or that your community is looking at. But I just wanted to kind of highlight a few that we see kind of regularly popping up. And first and foremost, I'm going to talk about general financial education. General financial education, things like the budgeting, how to access and use checking accounts, or being comfortable going to the bank, all these kinds of traditional financial skills. Building a strong foundation for those is pretty critical, and so many of our housing authorities and other tribal communities have developed some really strong financial education programs. And I am, on our next slide, going to talk a little bit around some of those resources that are available to support those kinds of programs. Also, homebuyer education, providing classes for individuals in the community that might want to learn specifically about becoming a homeowner, but also things that you might not necessarily think of, like home repair and maintenance, things that might not have been critical if individuals had just been renting previously. And then lastly, some really great home ownership counseling programs out there, where folks are helping do things like loan packaging, helping people access subsidies or down payment assistance programs that might be available, helping people fix their credit, doing financial coaching. Financial coaching is a one-on-one relationship with someone who is trying to achieve financial goals, like, for example, maybe reaching the financial goal of setting aside the down payment for a house, or even going as far as to help people find the right home that fits their needs, and kind of navigate that first, finding your realtor, all those kinds of things that might not be comfortable or might be new to the home buyer. Next slide. So inside the handbook, which just has a really great chapter on this, and I strongly recommend looking at it, it highlights two resources that I wanted to share. And the reason that these resources were highlighted is because that they are the two curriculums that are out there that are available that are specifically designed and adapted for Native communities. And there are tons, and I could, for those who know me, I could talk for hours about all the other great resources that are out there. There is there are, online home ownership programs that people can use, with cool videos and different things like that that you can integrate into your programs. But I just wanted, given our time limitations, wanted to focus on two. So one is Pathways Home, and that program is run by NAIHC, and that is a traditional home ownership curriculum that is specifically adapted to Native American communities. So, for example, an adaptation of things that they focus on, they explain things like the 184 program and other kinds of resources that are out there that might be more unique for Native American communities. And the other curriculum, of course, is near and dear to my heart, which is the Building Native Communities Financial Skills for Families curriculum, which is, of course, co-owned by Oweesta and First Nations Development Institute. And that program is about over 20 years old. We are on the 5th edition of that curriculum, and that focuses on those foundational cornerstone pieces of financial capabilities. And things like how to impact and improve your credit, what are the basic tenets of lending, how do you open a checking or savings account. And along with that suite of service, we also have a variety of other kind of financial capability training programs that support that. We have a financial coaching training program, as well as we just came out with it. We're super excited about it, a youth financial education curriculum. And we do actually see more tribal housing authorities doing that kind of work, which is exciting. But those are two specific curriculums. Both, I think, are well used and well loved in Native communities. Can we go to the next slide, please? I just wanted to highlight, I get this question all the time. What does it mean to have a curriculum that's culturally relevant, and why is that important? I just brought out a couple things here. One is using content and topics that are useful to the target audience, using communication vehicles that resonate with the target audience. For example, one of the things we try to think creatively around when we do youth financial education is, how can we bring in technology and, smartphones and different things like that might speak as a vehicle that engages youth more intensely, right? So trying to match up the communication vehicles, such as when you're doing classes, trying to have really interesting training program and fun exercises and things like that really resonate with the target audience. The other important things are having examples that capture the experience of the target audience. So, for example, you might you wouldn't want to have a financial capability curriculum, that doesn't resonate either with the income levels that you most commonly see with your community, or with sort of this financial sophistication or levels of understanding in your community, right? You'd want to find something that was adapted and kind of met the needs of the majority of folks that you would be working with. And then having it be accessible, right? Using imagery that, like our curriculum, for example, has a bunch of like fun little comics in it that, just tries to make, we try to make financial education fun, which, sometimes is a little bit of a reach, but, we're out there, we're trying to do that, right? So those are examples of kind of having culturally relevant curriculum. And both of those resources that I shared with you are examples of that. We have train the trainer programs where folks can come in, learn the curriculum, and learn different training techniques, which are very fun, as does NAIHC on the Pathways Home curriculum. Next slide. So, I just shared with you a bunch of different homebuyer readiness programs and resources. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about how do you know what is the right thing for your community? How do you know what the community needs? Like, so all the way through, what kinds of programs are going to make things accessible? What kind of preparation level do people need? All the way through, if we're going to have a class, do we need to have it do we need to have it at nights? Do we need to offer it during the daytime and offer childcare? How do we know even how to structure our classes or our one-on-one counseling in a way that meets community needs? And so the slide you're looking at right now is actually a picture, and it's a foundation for a house. Yes, I purposely punned you there. Sharon is going to talk a lot about the community needs assessment and that process that you go through. And that is really the cornerstone, the foundation of being able to develop strong homeownership programs. Next slide. So a little bit about the needs assessment process, and you're going to get to hear a lot from Sharon just about giving a really great example of the work that they have done on the Cheyenne River Reservation around this. And so you're going to get to kind of see all these stages and all this process in action through her. But just wanted to share with you kind of the basics of going through the needs assessment process, and this is also in the handbook. But you go through a process of survey design where you are developing out the methodology as far as how you're going to reach people in your community, determining who to survey, and how you are going to do that distribution, right? So I've seen communities do all sorts of creative things, all the way through those of you who might have districts or something like that, having district individuals kind of being in charge of distribution methods. Leech Lake did very creatively, when people came to pick up their turkeys at Thanksgiving, made them do the needs assessment survey. So you can kind of do a variety of different things with your distribution methodology. The really important thing is that when you think about it is to try to get a large sample size as representative of the community as possible, and to really think creatively about how to get those out into the community. And then determining the goal at the outset, because you really have to, when you're doing needs assessment in your community, know what you're trying to get, because it's very tempting. That one of the things I see all the time with some of the communities we work with are folks going in and the surveys, oh my gosh, guys, they can get so long because people, you've got this department that wants to ask these questions and this department wants to add this, and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to apply for this and I'm going to apply for that grant and I need information here. And then the next thing you know, no one will fill out the survey. So it's really important from the outset to know exactly what the goal is so that you can really craft survey instruments and the distribution method that really fits the needs of the community and can kind of make your process a little bit more targeted and thoughtful so that you can make sure that you get a good response rate and that you are asking only questions that you really need so that you're not overwhelming community members. So I think that kind of wraps up the basics of sort of what I was trying to lay out here around homebuyer readiness and about being able to assess and do those foundational pieces for community members. And I will pass it back to our wonderful web moderator.
Thank you, Krystal. We're still having a technical difficulty issue with audio for our second panelist. If you could hold for just a second, or if there are any questions following Krystal's presentation, if you would like to submit those at this time, we can do a brief Q&A while we troubleshoot the audio issue.
I guess one question I can ask Krystal is so a survey is certainly a valuable thing. We're very much in favor of that, but one thing people might be cautious about is what is the investment to pull off a successful survey? Certainly we can get feedback from Sharon later, but how much time and money do we think is necessary to have a successful survey?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can, I can answer that to the degree that, Oweesta have helped several groups do that kind of work. And we certainly do needs assessment, market study as with many of our startup community development financial institutions that are wanting to get a better sense of what kind of lending products and those are needed in the community. And so I will say that I have seen a lot of community members kind of respond to this idea creatively. Like, so for example, I've seen, for example, folks using like AmeriCorps Vistas creatively to keep costs low if they're from the community themselves. I've seen folks that maybe are working with someone and using adaptive template. And kind of they use examples from other communities and kind of build it themselves and kind of do a DIY version of a needs assessment. And all the way through folks that, really there are a lot of resources out there, like different grant programs and such that you can get that kind of support community assessment. And so, going on and you can get one of those grants, folks that are investing, $100,000 or more in then that needs assessment process, and maybe bringing in grad students from a university and having some of them help, design the survey instruments and even do representative sampling across the whole reservation. But so I think there's definitely variations in scope of what I've seen. I think the most important things that I see, and I think a lot of those varieties can be successful, honestly. But a lot of it relies on bringing in good partners. So, for example, if you bring in good partners from different tribal departments, you can, a lot of times, one department of the tribe might have collected data on something already, and you don't even have to ask those questions. Or if you bring in other partners, they might be able to help with survey distribution in a really positive way, in a way that keeps costs down. So that is one way you can kind of relieve costs. You can also blow it up a little bit that way, as you accommodate more partners. I would say I have seen kind of them run the gamut, all the way through, like $7,000 all the way through like $120,000. So it really depends. And I'd be very curious to know kind of, where Sharon fell in the process, because I read hers and it was amazing. So you can do a lot of things, but, to kind of reach those needs. But, finding there are a lot of resources out there that can defer cost. I hope that helps a little bit. And I'm not the expert in that, but those are just examples from what I've seen from various tribal communities.
That's great. I'm glad you mentioned, I think we're still getting Sharon connected, but I do want to point out that if you'd like to follow along during the webinar, you can view the Tribal Leaders Handbook on Homeownership on the Center for Indian Country Development website at the Minneapolis Federal Reserve. And we have a section there as a case study for the Cheyenne River Housing Authority needs assessment, as well as more in-depth information on how to conduct one of these events. And I'm glad you brought up partners. That's something I also wanted to ask about. But right now, we've also got a question from Teresa Koenig, which is, how often do you conduct the surveys, right? Do you do this once and then you're good for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So there's two when you do an assessment like this, there's two kinds of data that you're usually pulling. So you usually will have primary data and secondary data. And so, you know, usually that secondary data, right, that's going to be census information. That's going to be all the stuff like that you include when you write a grant. You know, oh, blah, you know, our community has this percent unemployment, and our, blah, you know, our community, blah, 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 all that kind of data. And so it's really good. That data oftentimes doesn't need to be updated that regularly because it just sort of depends on when the last census information became available out there. I will say that usually what we see, you know, you definitely want to be updating your data at least every 5 years. But I oftentimes see groups that will do it more regularly than that, just because your program, you know, is going to be changing, it's going to evolve, there's going to be different needs, and hopefully your community is growing and evolving too, right? So a lot of times people try to get on a cycle of kind of every 3 years or something like that, where they're kind of revisiting it, or at least revisiting parts of it, right? Where they might be, oh, we didn't collect this when we should have asked this question. Oops, our bad. You know, and they're kind of gradually, but what you want to be doing is just creating a culture of learning where you're constantly in communication with your community and grounding all your programming in the kinds of conversation that you have with when you're doing that kind of survey distribution, but also there's other mechanisms too, you know, having focus groups of your clients. Maybe having an advisory board of local community members that can give you feedback where when you roll out a program, right, that you can say, having a culture, for example, that you survey after you do your classes and you ask, how was this? What did we not talk about? What do we do? You know, there's really, it's really about embedding that culture of learning into your whole organization so that you can have that kind of quality programming. But yes, I think you know some of these, especially like the kind of large scale needs assessment that Sharon did. I mean, like that can be very exhausting. Like you wouldn't want to do that annually, just because you know it takes a lot of time and energy, and a lot of times we're working for organizations or tribal departments that maybe don't have all, you know, they're doing a lot of other things as well, right? So. It depends a little bit on the scale of the kind of needs assessment that you were doing as well. But yes, you know, I think generally I would recommend kind of every 5 years. But I'm curious kind of if other folks on the line have thoughts around that as well.
Okay, great. And I think we're maybe ready to bring in Sharon.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to share some of our work on Cheyenne River. Could we go to the next slide, please? I'm going to share a little bit about a couple of surveys, housing needs assessment surveys that we've done. This particular slide here shows that, you know, from our first home ownership needs assessment, we found that there was a disconnect between veterans and them knowing what's available to them. And so we partnered with the South Dakota Housing Development Authority and the South Dakota Housing Development Authority to conduct a special needs assessment for veterans. And there was Cheyenne River, Oweesta, and Krystal that took advantage of this opportunity. We worked with a great contractor, Kevin Kleinville from Big Water Consulting, and so we put together this survey that we wanted to gather some information from the veterans. We also partnered with our tribal veteran service officer, and the veteran service officers on all three reservations also had a need to create a baseline for data collection. So this was really a true partnership approach, and we're pleased with the outcome because it really changed how we are going to approach serving veterans in the future. And our goal is to really get more veterans into homeownership. So if we could go to the next slide. after we went through the survey, and it was we did it with in a short period of time, and so we quickly worked. We had a Veterans Advisory Committee that helped us review and design the survey instrument and gave us some feedback about methodology and how to do outreach for veterans. So we appreciated their input. Some of the things that we found out was, just their perception of barriers to homeownership. A lot of them identified that down payment and closing costs was they seen that as the biggest barrier. That was followed by some credit issues. They recognized that there's a lack of housing stock. So it kind of mirrored what we found with our first housing survey. But the other thing that it identified too was that they had some concerns about the monthly payment. The other is that we knew that there was we have an overcrowding problem, and then a lot of the veterans own their own home, but they need some care. So we gathered some new information, and so we want to respond to that. If we go to the next slide, please. So here this is an example of the type of information that you can get. The majority of the veterans responded that they thought that the credit was poor, but we were also surprised that there was a growing number from a previous study that showed that credit. I know the importance of credit, and I think my credit rating is fair. And we're finding that out, that a lot of people, are becoming more aware and are taking positive steps to build positive points on their credit score. So that's encouraging for us. The other side there, the other chart or graph, is this was information that we kind of collected of just their general understanding of the benefits that are available to veterans, not just the housing loan, but just other services that they may not be aware. And you can see that a lot of them really didn't know benefits that were available to them. For example, the transition assistance. So this was good information for the veteran service officers who were partners with us on this. It was good information for them to start doing their outreach on some of these topics. Next slide, please. So just to summarize this particular housing needs assessment, here's some highlighted findings and followed by the action items that we plan to take. And I'll share a couple of them. One of the things from the housing perspective was that the veteran really didn't understand that they were interested in purchasing, but they weren't aware of the NADL program. And that particular program is a great resource for them. And so in response, our action to that at Housing Authority is that we are developed and we're going to roll out a veterans-only homebuyer readiness curriculum that just focuses on the NADL mortgage loan process and application. So veterans that take this particular class will start with their NADL application. And as we go through a series of classes and bringing in experts to talk to them, like our loan people, we hope to have the DA loan officer come down and spend a session with them. But at the end of this curriculum, they will have their application completed, providing their credit ready. But if not, then we will work with them and for them, Community Fund, our native city of I, to to help them build up and address the credit issues. So we're going to start this class at the end of March, so we're excited about it. We don't know, we're just really open to trying this approach and see if it makes the veterans feel more comfortable and having that type of coaching and mentoring assistance. And so we're anxious to see the outcome of our efforts. The other thing that happened with this is that there was issues that, for example, the younger veterans felt that they weren't getting the recognition and respect coming back, and so we're working with the Tribal Veteran Service Officer to share the findings of this survey with veterans groups on our reservation. And so hopefully we can raise some awareness and do some advocacy work for veterans issues. So this was just completed a year ago, and so it's fairly new to us, but we're really glad that we did it. I mean, it was work that we needed to hear that veteran's voice. The next slide, please. This was our housing needs assessment survey again. It was a partnership with the South Dakota Housing Development Authority and the South Dakota Native Homeownership Coalition. They put the money up and we matched it. So that was how I both of these studies. But this particular study was really the first step in us making sure that our development plans would be were a good fit. And so we really needed that community voice. And this particular study gave us that community voice and really kind of set us in the right direction. Next slide, please. Again, we worked with Big Water Consulting on this particular project, and their guidance was really a large part of our success. But the methodology that we used is we used either an online or a paper form, and here we really wanted to target those people that we knew would be seeking homeownership. So this one wasn't designed for rental, but it was really designed more for homeownership. We wanted to get some perception, and we wanted to make sure that we captured what I call priorities and preferences of individuals, that we know that there's a diverse population group and that the needs are unique to their own families. So we wanted to make sure that we captured that diversity so that we weren't focusing on just one way to do something. Next slide, please. So here, our findings were eye-opening for us in some ways and validating that, some of the information that we were using, like our waiting list data and some of the census data that, one, validated about our efforts, but it also redirected some of our other efforts. So, for example, one of the questions we wanted to know was, how do they think that, what are their thoughts about getting a mortgage loan, the whole process? So we asked that question, and we weren't surprised, that people thought it was very difficult, with that being said, we also wanted to make sure that we followed that up by, letting them know that there are ways that they can do that, and we wanted to know what kind of help they needed. So it was an opportunity for us to test some of the services or the products that we had and people we rolled about. If we can go to the next slide, please. So here again, there's just some data points. The first one there where it says affordable mortgage payment, this one was a little surprising to us, and we knew that there was a response from this that we needed to do a lot of work. For example, the one the affordability range was, the average was a little under $400. And so if people are thinking they can only pay $400, and if we back that up into a mortgage loan amount, that's really only, about $50,000 mortgage. And in our area, there's no way that you can purchase a home for $50,000, especially when we were looking at, they were looking at 3 and 4 bedroom homes. So, this we knew that we really, had to, when we had our homeowner readiness classes, that we really got to spend a lot of time on the calculations of estimating what their affordability payments would be, and then what they could afford, the dollar amount of the mortgage. And so we've had over 100 graduates from our readiness classes, and it is a sticker shock for them at first, but a lot of them thought, I can afford more than I thought I could. It's just, restructuring my debt and dropping a lot of my debt that I traditionally carry that aren't the debt that it's a good debt to carry. So, this, was good for us to know that this was a perception. The other point that I want to point out is we also knew that we were going to be targeting retirees that were living in employee or employer-based housing. And so a lot of times they'll come to us a few months before they retire, and they say, well, I'm already retired and I want a house. And I'm gonna live on my retirement income. But they didn't plan for homeownership. And so we started to introduce, try to find out, what is your retirement income going to look like, how much time before you retire, and because we knew some were on a short track, but it was more important for us to get the education out to the younger ones that planning for your retirement, and if you're going to plan to own a home, so hand in hand. So overall, you can see that what little information we had was making a big difference for us. If we can go on to the next one, please. So here I won't go through all the recommendations, but I want to go through some of the recommendations. The home needs assessment process is really critical, and I think that, for those of you that are thinking about doing it, I just firmly encourage you to please take that time to do that. It will definitely give you a good guidance for your future strategic plans for any residential housing development. It's also helpful in both homeownership and rental. So, we are still using the data to develop some of our projects, and always looking for ways to improve our homebuyer readiness services. Next slide, please. So here we just listed some real critical takeaways that, but the other thing that this did was the third point there is that interested potential homeowners are present in sufficient numbers to support your development. Every community has hardworking families that deserve homeownership, and that we need to work with them to identify their affordability and try to and just help them get to that homeownership goal.
That is your last slide. I'd like to turn it over to James again for our transferable lessons and Q&A session.
Great, thank you, Tyler. Yeah, I'm going to highlight some things that I thought were great from the presentation, and then I've got a few questions, and we'll go to questions from the audience. Please submit questions in the question box if you have any. So right at the beginning, Krystal was talking about the sort of the low number, 30% of people, tribal members, American Indians, saying that they have emergency funds, right? And it's just to point out that poverty and capital access are some of the key barriers to housing and homeownership. But the good news we're talking about, even though this is a really complex process for individuals, tribes and the organizations that serve them can take a really active role in educating and assisting people in navigating those processes. There are a ton of financial and educational resources available. We talked about Oweesta's program. Sharon, I believe, is down at Enterprise Community Partners program, a partner of CICD right now. It's why we're having this webinar. It's something that no matter where you are along in your internal infrastructure, there's programming and individuals that are willing to help you help the people you serve. Something really interesting that Sharon was pointing out is that almost everyone was unaware of the Native American Direct Loan Program from the VA when they conducted their survey. And I want to point out that these federal programs are certainly something we need to educate our tribal members about, but at the same time, we also need to stand together and advocate for the federal government to do a better job of rolling them out. And that's something CICD has been working on, including 184, NADL, USDA 502. There's some exciting stuff going on in South Dakota there. So just remember that it's not just about educating people about homeownership opportunities. It's about making sure that Congress hears about the problems we're facing and getting access to these dollars that are meant to go to tribal members. Krystal also talked about the fact that we need culturally relevant programming. And I want to emphasize that there's lots of course, we all know there's lots of diversity within tribes and between tribes, but this programming can very much be tailored to your community, be made culturally relevant. It's part of the active role you can take in rolling out these educational materials. I want to talk a bit about, of course, the surveys, and emphasize the surveys are really powerful tools to bring the community into the process and plan the use of limited resources, right? We're figuring out why are people facing housing challenges exactly, and that will help you figure out what you need to focus on in terms of the problems that need to be solved. I also like this idea, we're talking about a culture of learning throughout the organizations you work with, right? The Tribal Council, Tribal Housing Department, and so on, right? We want to not have these surveys just be an isolated production, but one part of a tool as you work and deal with a shifting landscape that hopefully gets to a point where every tribal member has adequate and more than adequate housing, right? So they can flourish and succeed. I also thought it was interesting, this note that people were surprised by what they actually could afford. And to point out that even though we've got barriers again in capital and income, if we help people and guide them in the right directions, we absolutely can afford quality housing right now. And with that, I'm going to ask a question before I turn it over to the audience. So one thing I want to ask about surveys is it's an opportunity we said for partnership, and it's an opportunity, of course, to assess your community. But in what other ways are surveys our communities? For example, I'm right now on the road at a tribal college getting ready to train students and members of the community to be survey enumerators, right? And so is this an opportunity to create jobs in the reservation, to bring other people into tribal efforts? And I can direct that question to Sharon and Krystal, whoever would like to take a crack at it.
Yeah, so I'll just say a little bit about like the survey distribution methods, and I loved your example about kind of the training process that you can go through with younger folks. But many years ago I was part of a research team that served the Pine Ridge Reservation. We worked with a bunch of graduate students from Colorado State University. And it was really interesting. One of the people struggled with, wanting to open up to external members, people that weren't part of the community. And so it can be a really powerful tool to make sure that, when you're using survey distribution methods, if you're going to go to house, if you're going to, that you're using local community members and there's a lot of options for that. It's a great summer job for somebody, right? And it can be affordable. You can train folks how to do that. I think there are issues, and so you really have to do a thoughtful training of those individuals, and that you want to make sure people understand that their information is confidential. You know, like some people might not want to, you know, oh, I don't want my auntie to know this, you know. There's some of that can come up. So making sure people understand the information is confidential and how it will be used, right? So that's also very, very critical. You know, if people understand, oh, this is the data that we need to design useful programs, you know, that creates trust, and it creates people that are willing to be honest about through the survey distribution, and more willing to actually fill it out. So it's not just they're filling out the first page and then done. And then the other thing I would, you know, just add about that is that, you know, so there's just a lot of different ways to do that. And then when you get to the end, it's really critical that you give the information back, that people see how information is being used regularly. That goes back to that culture of learning thing, right? So, you know, being able to communicate back, and I know the amazing work that that the Cheyenne River Housing Authority does, right? But that, you know, like that information gets back to that, and they see the impact of that in the programming that's coming out, right? And then that means that in the future, when they want to go to do surveying, then people are like, yes, absolutely, I will do that. I see that, you know, that I saw that survey go out in the tribal newsletter, and I know that they're actually going to use that, and that information is, you know, going to come back to me. It's going to be public, and it's going to be affecting the programs that I care about. So, you know, the more that you do that kind of work and you handle that with integrity, and do that well, the easier that process becomes. And then kind of the other last thing that I would, I think I got all my main points. But Sharon, did you have anything to add about to his question?
Well, the survey methodology, you know, what we chose is something that was the survey instrument itself, you know, could be self-administered, or one of our staff members could sit down and do it in an interview style, or they could go online. So we didn't stick with just one approach to doing this. And the other was that we had some incentives that, you know, people completed the survey, their name got put into a drawing, and we drew weekly during the survey period. So, you know, you really have to be flexible and creative in where you go. I mean, we went to larger employers to get information, but again, we had the great guidance of Big Water Consulting, so that just made it easier for us to throw ideas out, do some brainstorming, and Kevin helped us, you know, that those just gave those are really the pros and cons of each of them. So we had good success. We used what I thought was the right methodology for us.
Okay, great. No, that's all fantastic to hear, and something we think about at the center is the people sometimes call it asterisk nation, right? We've got a lack of key data in Native communities, and so it's fantastic to hear about tribes taking the lead on developing the data that they need to grow and prosper. Another quick question I had is, how has the survey at Cheyenne River, asking this to Sharon, changed sort of the long-term outlook of the tribe? Do you feel like it's changed the attitude of tribal leadership and tribal members and thinking about the future of not just housing, but tribal policy in general?
I think that, you know, we've got change going on. There's more of a change agent. I think the biggest change that we will reap the benefits from is smaller homeowners that we are able to have them, you know, own their own home, and the communities, we see the difference. We see families that are owning their own home, that number's growing, and they are your best advocates. They achieve it and they share it with their family and friends, and so our politicians see that, you know, that there is change, that people are, you know, just proud of their accomplishments, and so they in turn are supportive of our housing authority's efforts to promote homeownership. Say we are, ready and think, how can we help? And thought was the change agent for us, and it continues to be. And we hope to be able to leverage that to attract, more interested homeowners that thought it was impossible. It helps us attract new partners, and it just overall is a positive boost to our community and our community.
Okay, great. We've got a question here. Anything from Krystal? We've got a question here from Jonelle Year Out. She wants to know, when you're thinking about your needs assessment, whether it be a survey or some other form of that, how do you use that to design your loans, especially when you're thinking about trust land and different kinds of federal loan programs?
If I understand your question right, our organization have both the trust plan and the deeded plan, and the loan products allow you to build on either one. So one, homeownership, individuals interested in homeownership, they can, build on either the trust or the deeded. Our survey was, didn't really capture a preference for deeded or tribal land, because, the majority of our clients choose the tribal land route. And I apologize if I didn't answer that properly.
Hey, Janelle. Yes, Janelle, I know each other pretty well, but Janelle, yeah, so this is a great question, and I think Sharon did a great job kind of talking about pieces of this, but I think it's really important, if you're thinking about designing loan products off of it, there are things that it'll tell you and there are things that it won't. Right. So, one of the things we see, for example, we see this with a lot of folks who do maybe want to develop CD5s and want to develop, for example, small business programs. Right. And when everybody does the survey, everybody's like, yes, I want to be an entrepreneur. That sounds amazing. I would absolutely take out a loan for that. And then, you develop this great small business product based off of what you heard about how everybody's going to be an entrepreneur. And then no one wants to be an entrepreneur, really, right? So there are certain limitations around the survey, and sometimes you have to be really thoughtful when you design the questions so you don't get false positives, right? Where suddenly everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. But one of the things you can learn, is especially when you're thinking about home ownership specifically, seeing which of the demographic groups are most interested in home ownership. What kinds of homes are they looking for? Do they want to be on their own land? Do they have, is it wanting to be on manufactured? Are they comfortable with, what kinds of homes are they comfortable with? Do they, and also, getting a sense of, so who are the groups that want to be homeowners? And then, what are their income levels and what are the kinds of things that they would qualify for? So you can parse out pieces of kind of objective things that can inform your programming. But it is, and you can even try to get a little bit nitty gritty on the questions on some of those things. And then some of it you've got to field test a little bit, and there are limitations with survey data. And so I think it's always really useful to have focus groups or to have other individuals that can kind of inform, not only kind of as you pilot out the actual assessment itself, having people from the community, fill it out and be like, oh, I don't understand this, or this question didn't make any sense to me. But also, giving you, help you kind of run it through so that you can really, am I getting all the information I really need? And are the questions designed well enough that I am able to take really accurate information from that?
If I could just, this is Sharon again, if I could just add to that. If those of you, and I'm sure by now everyone has a copy, at least PDHEs, have a copy of the Tribal Leaders Handbook on Homeownership. That was a publication of the Center of Indian Country Development from the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. In that, in the appendix there is a copy of our Cheyenne River's needs assessment survey instrument. And we did, there was a section that we got on there about preferences, home preferences. So if you look through that, we did ask, types of housing. We did ask if they wanted to build on a home site. So I hope that if you have a chance, you can look at our survey instrument, and perhaps that might have answered your question too.
Okay, great. We've got a question here from Tanya Plummer. So she wants to know, how can we advocate successfully for higher density housing development, and that be either as subdivisions or multifamily units, especially for those communities that are used to doing piece by piece sort of one-off housing construction?
James, this is Sharon. I don't think I heard all of the question.
Yeah, let's say that again. We're trying to say, how can we share with tribal leaders the benefits of having either a subdivision, kind of like your work at Cheyenne River, or a multifamily unit, as opposed to sort of one-off home sites, which I think a lot of tribes have experience with.
I can only speak for Cheyenne River, and you really, it is a great question, because you have to have the support or the involvement of tribal leadership, and making sure that you are communicating your activities, that they have the opportunity. We invite them, we have our annual planning retreat, and we invite them, and we lay out our projects and our proposed projects, and share with them the data from the classes that we've had, and then graduates we've had, and so we always make sure that they're in the loop, either through just direct presentations to them, or sharing of data. So as they see the change in their community, they hear from their constituents about positive experiences with Cheyenne River Housing Authority, that really helps build the trust and making sure it's between tribal leadership and their tribal entities.
Okay, fantastic. Now that makes a lot of sense, and I think when we're talking about serving a community and assessing a community, you gotta keep in mind the partnership, not just to sort of external partners, which we've got another question about that in a second, but making sure that you've got buy-in from tribal leadership and the community at large. And the question that I was referring to was from Brandon Sam, and he was saying, do we know of any examples where tribes have hired a developer to help coordinate a 5-year or 10-year plan across departments?
I apologize for the poor audio that I have on my end.
Just over in, sorry.
I think there are more master planning efforts going on. I know at Cheyenne River we have a master planning effort going on that involves, and we're just a small part of it on the housing development side. But our tribal planning office is connected to one of the colleges, the Philippines college out of Rapid City, and a professor has kind of taken it on as a project that they really want the students to be involved in a master planning process. So that's one example of using master planning in a large scale and having a great partner of a university that is willing to take on that challenge. I also know of other efforts that involve hiring a firm, a firm that has diversity in there and helping and being on site and helping walk the tribe through a process or getting input and then developing a plan based on that input. We definitely look forward and welcome those opportunities to participate in a larger reservation effort. And, we can be the leader in this and, like we do on this news assessment, and, we hope that we helped that it was a jumping start for others to build off of the work that we did.
Okay, well, I want to thank Krystal and Sharon again for joining us as panelists today. I want to, of course, invite everyone to come back next week and the week after for the remainder of this webinar. But, of course, if you can't join, NCAI is going to be recording these sessions. And with that, I'll turn it over to NCAI staff to wrap up this meeting. Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Thanks, James. You pretty much covered it as far as announcements. Thank you, everyone on the line, for joining us. Please don't forget to register for parts 3 and 4 of the webinar series that you see on your screen. Next week at the same time, same place, we'll have partnerships and financing, followed in the subsequent week by our last installment of this 4-part series, Making Homeownership Affordable. As was mentioned, copies of the Tribal Leaders Handbook on Homeownership can be downloaded for free from CICD's website at the address on your screen. As previously mentioned, the webinar is going to be posted on NCAI's YouTube channel. Once the webinar is posted, we'll be sending an email out to all registrants, and it will include links to directly download the handbook from CICD's website, as well as other resource materials that are gathered from both our panelists, NCAI, and any other partners out there with respect to homeownership in Indian country. We look forward to you continuing to join us over the next few weeks. For any questions that you may have as follow-up, please reach out to either James or myself, and we will connect you with either one of our panelists to more detailed response, or James or I will respond to your question. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, guys. Bye.